I found out my parents are running an illegal operation, and they expect me to take over. Growing up, I always admired my parents. James and Linda were the epitome of success. They owned a chain of upscale boutiques and were respected figures in our community. Our house was the envy of the neighborhood, a sprawling estate with a manicured lawn and a view that overlooked the city. From the outside, we were the perfect family. My parents were wealthy, generous, and always seemed to have everything under control. I never questioned where the money came from because, to me, their success was the result of hard work and a bit of entrepreneurial luck. They often traveled for business, leaving me with nannies or relatives when I was younger. As I got older, they became more involved in my life, encouraging me to focus on school and later on my degree in business management. They said they were preparing me to take over the family business one day. I was excited about the prospect. I wanted to continue their legacy and make them proud. After finishing college, my parents finally invited me to join the business. They said it was time I learned what really went on behind the scenes. I was eager to step into my role, to understand the intricate workings of our family enterprise. I had visions of board meetings, strategic planning, and market expansion. What I didn't realize was that the reality of our business was far more sinister than I had ever imagined. If you're not following our channel, you might never see it again. But if you're subscribed, congratulations. You'll always have access to the most interesting stories whenever you want to watch and listen. It started with small hints. My first day at the main office was nothing like I expected. The boutique headquarters was a lavish building downtown, complete with sleek offices and a showroom that boasted the latest in luxury fashion. But the atmosphere was tense. The employees avoided eye contact, and there were whispers in the corridors whenever my parents weren't around. My father, James, took me aside that afternoon. He said he wanted to show me something important. I thought he was going to take me through the finances or introduce me to the company's strategic plans. Instead, he drove me to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was an old, industrial building, unmarked and out of place for what I thought was a retail-focused business. Inside, the warehouse was a hive of activity, but not the kind you would expect in the fashion industry. Workers moved crates that were stacked high, and everything seemed to operate with a sense of urgency. I noticed the crates were being loaded into unmarked trucks. My father led me to a side office, where my mother, Linda, was waiting, her expression serious. "What is this place?" I asked, confused. "This," my father began, "is the real backbone of our business." My mother gestured for me to sit down. "It's time you learned the truth," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth I was used to. "The boutiques are just a front." "A front for what?" I demanded, my heart pounding. My father sighed and began to explain. The boutiques, the luxurious lifestyle, the wealth, it was all a facade. In reality, they were running a massive smuggling operation. They dealt in everything from counterfeit luxury goods to illegal substances, using the boutiques to launder money and move their merchandise through legitimate channels. The warehouse was the hub of their operation, a place where goods were stored and distributed to various parts of the country. I sat there, stunned. My parents weren't the successful business owners I had idolized all my life. They were criminals. "You've built your entire life on this?" I whispered, horrified. "This is how we've provided for you," my mother said coldly. "And now, it's time for you to step up and take over." The weeks that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. My parents expected me to accept their illegal empire as my birthright. They introduced me to their network of contacts, corrupt officials, suppliers, and distributors. They spoke of loyalty, power, and legacy. My father showed me how they laundered money through the boutiques, while my mother explained the logistics of smuggling goods across borders. They treated it like any other business, detached and clinical, as if they were discussing supply chain management rather than criminal activity. "You'll understand in time," my father said, as if my resistance was simply youthful naivety. "This is how the world works." Real power comes from being willing to do what others won't. I felt sick. Everything I had believed about my family was a lie. I was raised in luxury, given the best education, all financed by a web of deceit and crime. My parents were grooming me to take over their empire, to continue the legacy of corruption they had built. I tried to talk to them, to reason with them. We can change, I pleaded. We can legitimize the business, turn things around. But they laughed at my suggestions, dismissing them as idealistic and impractical. This is the only way to survive in a world built on greed and power, my mother said. You're either in control, or you're at the mercy of those who are. It became clear that they were not just unwilling to change, they were incapable of it. They had been in this life for so long that they couldn't see any other way. I realized then that they didn't just want me to take over, they expected it. They believed it was my destiny to continue their work, to carry the mantle of the family's dark legacy. I knew I had to do something, but I was terrified. My parents were powerful, connected, and ruthless. If I went to the authorities, I would not only be betraying them, but I could also end up implicated in their crimes. They had made sure that I was involved enough to be considered complicit should I try to turn against them. I was trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by wealth that was tainted by illegal activities. I started to gather information discreetly. I copied documents, recorded conversations, and took photos of the warehouse operations. I needed evidence, not just to protect myself, but to expose what my parents were doing. I knew it wouldn't be easy. They were meticulous, covering their tracks and operating through layers of intermediaries. But I had access that others didn't. They trusted me because I was their child, their heir. Every day, I played the role of the dutiful successor, pretending to learn the ropes while secretly documenting their crimes. It was exhausting and terrifying. I had to hide my true feelings, mask my disgust, and act as though I was coming to terms with the family business. The weight of the secret threatened to crush me, but I had to stay focused. If they suspected anything, if they found out what I was doing, I didn't know what they would do to me. Then, one evening, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. My parents were in a heated discussion with one of their associates about a new venture. They were planning to expand their operation into human trafficking. My blood ran cold as I listened. They were talking about exploiting desperate people, using them as commodities. It was a line that even they had never crossed before, and now they were considering it as the next step in their empire. I realized then that they were beyond redemption. They were willing to sink to any depth for power and money. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to act before they dragged me into their next atrocity. I contacted a lawyer, Mr. Grayson, someone who specialized in cases involving organized crime. I had to be cautious, using a burner phone and arranging a meeting in a public place where I wouldn't be recognized. I explained my situation, presenting the evidence I had gathered. Mr. Grayson listened intently, his expression grave. "You're in a very dangerous position," he said. "If your parents find out what you're doing, they won't hesitate to silence you. You need to be prepared for the fallout." "I know," I replied, my voice trembling. "But I can't just sit back and let this continue. They're talking about human trafficking now. I can't be a part of that. I need to stop them." Mr. Grayson agreed to help me, outlining a plan to bring the evidence to law enforcement and to work towards securing my immunity. It was a complex strategy involving federal agencies that dealt with organized crime. He warned me that it would take time and that I needed to continue gathering information to build a solid case. The next few weeks were a nerve-wracking ordeal. I went back to the warehouse, the boutiques, and the meetings, all while pretending to be the heir my parents wanted me to be. I documented every illegal transaction, every shipment, and every conversation that could incriminate them. Each day was a gamble, a risk that they would catch on to what I was doing. Then, one night, as I was copying files from my father's computer, my mother walked in. Our eyes met, and I knew in that instant that she understood what I was doing. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice icy. I felt my blood turn to ice. I was just looking at some reports, I stammered, trying to close the laptop. She rushed forward, pushing me aside and staring at the screen. Her face twisted in fury as she realized what I had been gathering. "You're betraying us," she hissed. "After everything we've done for you." "Done for me?" I shot back, my fear replaced by anger. "You mean the lies? The crimes? The lives you've ruined? You expect me to take over this empire of corruption?" She slapped me across the face, the sting sharp and immediate. "You ungrateful child," she spat. "We built this for you, to secure your future. And this is how you repay us?" My father entered the room then, his eyes going from my mother to me and then to the laptop. He quickly pieced together what was happening. For a moment, there was a tense silence, the air thick with the unspoken reality of what I had done. "You've made a grave mistake," my father finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can go against us? Against your own family?" I stood my ground, despite the terror coursing through me. "I'm not going to be part of this," I said defiantly. "I'm going to the authorities." My mother lunged at me, but my father held her back. "No," he said, his voice cold. "Let her go. She'll realize soon enough that there's no escaping this." I took the opportunity and ran. I grabbed my bag, the laptop, and the evidence I had gathered, and I fled the house. I knew I couldn't go home, couldn't go anywhere they could find me. I contacted Mr. Grayson, who arranged for me to meet with federal agents that night. I handed over everything, the files, the recordings, the photos. I told them everything I knew about my parents' operation, the smuggling, the laundering, the plans for human trafficking. They listened, taking notes and asking questions, their faces grim. "You've done the right thing," one of the agents said. "But you need to understand, your parents are dangerous people. They have connections, and they won't go down without a fight." The next few days were a whirlwind. The authorities moved quickly, raiding the warehouse, the boutiques, and our family home. My parents were arrested, their empire exposed for what it truly was. The media was all over the story, painting my parents as masterminds of a criminal network that spanned the globe. My role in bringing them down was part of the narrative, and I was thrust into the spotlight as the whistleblower who had turned against her own family. The trial was long and brutal. My parents' lawyers tried to paint me as a complicit participant who had turned on them to save myself. They dredged up every part of my life, scrutinizing my motives and my actions. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the documents, the testimonies from others involved in their network. It all pointed to the truth. My parents were convicted on multiple charges, including smuggling, money laundering, and conspiracy. They were sentenced to decades in prison, their empire dismantled. After the trial, I was left to rebuild my life. I had lost everything, my family, my home, the life I thought I knew. I moved to a different city, changed my name, and started over. I went into therapy, trying to come to terms with the reality of my parents and the dark legacy they had tried to pass on to me. It was a slow process, filled with moments of doubt and grief, but I knew I had made the right choice. I couldn't have lived with myself if I had stayed silent, if I had taken over their empire and continued the cycle of corruption and exploitation. I found a new purpose, working with organizations that helped victims of trafficking and smuggling, using my knowledge to aid in the fight against the kinds of operations my parents had been involved in. In the end, I learned that family is not defined by blood, but by the choices we make. My parents had chosen a path of darkness, and they had tried to drag me into it. But I had chosen to break free, to live a life of integrity and honesty. It cost me dearly, but it was a price worth paying for my conscience and my soul. I am not the heir to an empire of crime. I am my own person, building a life that is free from the chains of my past.